In 1942, an aspiring painter named Paul sat down to complete his latest work. He had just moved into a new house and was excited to finally have a place where he could paint without his landlord constantly harassing him. In fact, he'd found this house in the countryside isolated from other people. It was perfect for what he needed. But when he started painting his masterpiece, he realized something sinister was going on. Every time he painted someone, they vanished. Hi, welcome to my channel. Today, we're going to be looking at the creepy story of Paul and his cursed art. When Paul first moved into the old cottage, he was hopeful about the future. For years, he'd been living in Paris and working odd jobs while painting on the side. The rent was always too expensive, and there were so many people around. It was hard to focus on his art. So when he found this small cottage for rent in the middle of nowhere, he jumped at the chance. The owner of the home was an older woman who hardly ever came around. This meant Paul could live there alone and paint without any interruptions. He didn't know it at the time, but he was actually being watched the entire time by the old woman, who was also a very talented artist. She had lived in that cottage for over 30 years, and she'd made some amazing artwork during her time there. But she was getting old and wanted to move into a nursing home. When she saw Paul's paintings, though, she got an idea. She decided to let him stay in the cottage rent-free if he would agree to recreate some of her old masterpieces. At first, Paul thought this was a great deal. He could stay in the home for free and learn from some of the old woman's techniques. But he soon grew tired of copying her work. He wanted to do his own thing. So he told the old woman he was done and prepared to move out. The old woman wasn't happy with this arrangement, though. She demanded that he finish all of her paintings before he left, and that's when things got creepy. Paul went back into the attic to grab some of the old woman's paintings, and he noticed a locked chest. On closer inspection, he saw a keyhole in the front and noticed the old woman's key lying nearby. As he unlocked the chest, he found more of the old woman's paintings inside, and they were unlike anything he'd seen before. These weren't copies or unfinished pieces. These were the original artworks that the old woman had spent years on. They were beautiful, but something about them didn't seem right. And then he realized what it was. All of the people in the paintings were missing their eyes. Some of them were staring directly at the viewer, but they had no eyes. Others were looking away, and it seemed like they were searching for something. Paul showed these paintings to the old woman, and she was furious. She told him that he wasn't supposed to see those, and demanded he paint them over immediately. Paul refused, though. He wanted to understand why she had painted over these people's eyes. The old woman told him that it didn't matter, that he shouldn't even be asking these questions. Then she threatened to take away her permission for him to stay in the cottage. Paul was upset, but he stood his ground. He told the old woman he was unafraid of her or whatever curse she thought was on her paintings. Little did he know, though, that she was telling the truth. Later that night, Paul looked at the paintings again, and he could have sworn he saw the eyes move. But when he told his friend about this, his friend simply laughed. Still, Paul couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. One day, he brought in a model so he could paint a portrait of her. Everything was going well until he finished the eyes. As soon as he put the last brush stroke on her left eye, the model screamed and ran outside. Paul went to check on her, but she had vanished. He walked back inside and continued painting. As the day wore on, Paul's model slowly began to fade away. First, her face lost definition, then her body began to disappear. She looked at Paul and screamed, "Don't look at me." Before she completely vanished, Paul ran outside, but his model was nowhere to be found. He walked around the area, but he couldn't find any sign of her. He eventually gave up and went back to painting. He had to finish the portrait somehow, so he used his imagination to fill in the rest of the painting. But every time he added a stroke to the model's face, she appeared behind him, screaming for him to stop. After a while, Paul realized that he couldn't continue painting. He packed up his stuff and ran away from the cottage. He never looked back, and he hasn't touched a paintbrush since. Some people think the old woman was telling the truth about her paintings being cursed, but others think it was all in Paul's head. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. When he tells this story to people today, they often laugh at him and tell him there's no such thing as a curse. But sometimes in the middle of the night, he hears whispers coming from the attic of the cottage. Sometimes he even thinks he can hear his own name being called. Paul is now an old man, and he still wonders if the old woman was right. Was she cursed? If so, is she still trapped in the cottage? Or maybe she's haunting Paul for stealing her paintings. He may never know the truth, though. Even today, he doesn't go near the cottage. In fact, he's never even told anyone about it until recently. One day, Paul met a young woman who reminded him of himself. She was an artist who dreamed of making it big one day. She told Paul that she was renting a cottage in the countryside so she could focus on her work. When she mentioned that she was staying in the same cottage where Paul used to stay, he knew he had to tell her about the curse. He drove out to the cottage and confronted the young woman. He told her about his experience in the cottage and begged her to leave before it was too late. She didn't believe him, though, and told him to get lost. When he turned to leave, he heard a scream from inside the house. He ran to the door and pounded on it, but nobody answered. That's when he knew the curse was real. He watched as the young woman came out of the house carrying a large suitcase. She looked pale and frightened. And when Paul asked her what happened, she told him she found a locked chest in the attic. She said that she had a dream about two people in the attic, and she thought it was just a coincidence. But now she wasn't so sure. She told Paul that she'd only been in the cottage for a few days, and she already felt like something evil was in there with her. She said that she'd found several paintings with people's eyes missing, and every time she looked at one, she felt a cold sensation spread across her body. She said that she knew she had to leave immediately, which is why she was leaving her suitcase behind. When she turned to leave, Paul reached out and grabbed her arm. He told her that he was sorry for not believing her, and he offered to help her move her stuff out of the cottage. As they walked back to the car, Paul couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. He knew that the old woman had warned him about this, but he had ignored her. Now he worried that it was too late for the young woman, and that she was already trapped in the cottage. When they arrived at the cottage, Paul could see that the young woman was shaking. She told him to go ahead and open the trunk so she could get her stuff out of there. As he opened the trunk, he saw that it was full of canvases. He looked at the young woman and asked if she had brought these. She nodded her head and said that she needed them to finish her latest project. Paul felt a sense of foreboding, but he didn't say anything. He helped the young woman carry the canvases out of the trunk and into the house. As they walked through the door, Paul could feel the darkness closing in around him. He knew that he should leave, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. He watched as the young woman walked up the stairs to the attic. She disappeared from sight, and Paul could hear her talking to herself. He could also hear what sounded like screams coming from above. Paul felt a chill run down his spine. He knew that he should leave, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. Then suddenly, the door to the attic swung open and the young woman appeared. She was covered in paint, and her eyes were wide with fear. She stumbled down the stairs and collapsed onto the floor. Paul rushed to her side and asked what had happened. She looked up at him with a wild look in her eyes and whispered, "The paintings, they're alive," before she fainted. Paul didn't know what to do. He looked at the canvases on the floor and then back at the young woman. He knew that he had to get help, but he was afraid that no one would believe him. Still, he knew that he had to try. He dialed 911 and told the operator that he needed an ambulance. As he waited for the paramedics to arrive, Paul tried to wake the young woman up. He don't know what happened to her. The paintings were just canvases when he picked them up. And then suddenly she's here and covered in paint. But the young woman never regained consciousness. When the paramedics arrived, they took her away on a stretcher. Paul followed them out of the house and into the ambulance. He told them everything that had happened, but they just shook their heads and said that there was nothing they could do. Before the ambulance drove away, Paul looked at the young woman and saw that her eyes were open. They were blank and soulless, like they had been drained of color. Paul felt a sense of dread wash over him. He knew that the old woman had been right. The paintings were cursed, and the young woman was now a part of them. Paul never saw the young woman again, but he still thinks about her sometimes. He wonders if she's trapped in the cottage forever, or if she's free. He'll never know the truth, though, and he's afraid to find out. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe. If you want to watch more of my videos, click the video on screen now.